Yeah, okay. Okay, so we're just about on lawyer time. It's about 4:15. They'll start rushing in now in about 2 minutes. So I'd like to welcome you all here this afternoon. I'm Regina Pisa, the Chairman Emeritus of Goodwin Procter, and we're delighted to host this celebration together with the Harvard Law School Center on the Legal Profession to launch Heidi Gardner's new book. Heidi Gardner and Friends, I should say, because there are a lot of other people who have contributed to this work. You know, a book launch is an exciting time, and Heidi and the CLP's latest work, Leadership for Lawyers, Essential Leadership Strategies for Law Firm Success, is required reading for all law firms. So you should put me in the jacket, Heidi. And I want a signed copy, by the way. Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that the book notes is that a fundamental aspect of leadership is productively generating and responding to change. As the chairman of Goodwin Procter during an extraordinary period of change over 16 years, I couldn't agree more. I think any measure of success that we've had as a firm that we've achieved over this period of time is directly attributable to our willingness to embrace change. And I think that you've hit on something very core and important in the book. I think the book also notes that there are few opportunities for lawyers to develop and practice the skills they really need to inspire and build support for change. And that is also true. And I think that's why we have tried to work very closely with CLP over the years to help our lawyers develop those skills. And we look forward to continuing our work with CLP over the years as well. Before I begin this program, I just want to acknowledge somebody who's not here, who wasn't able to be here tonight, Scott Westfall, who, when I hired Scott, so Scott was working at McKinsey when we hired Scott. And Scott, as you know, is affiliated with the executive education program at CLP. I said to the headhunting firm, I'm looking for somebody who will do for Goodwin what McKinsey does. That is that, when you meet somebody at a cocktail party who's worked for McKinsey, within 15 minutes, you know that somewhere in their career they worked for McKinsey, because they took that training with them and that foundation with them through their whole career. And so, lo and behold, a week later, the headhunting firm, the search firm, called me and said, we want you to interview McKinsey's manager for professional development. And when I interviewed Scott, I said to him, at some point, Scott, you're going to write a book about this. What we do at Goodwin. Goodwin will be your crucible, will be your little experimentation lab, and what we do here, you'll write a book about, which turned out to be prophetic. So we're delighted that Scott was able to continue his work at Harvard's Center for Law and Legal Profession, and also be one of the contributors to this book. So enough about that. It's really my pleasure to turn the podium over to Derek Davis, the Executive Director of CLP, who will introduce Heidi to begin our program. Please also be sure to join your fellow guests after this. We're going to have a reception in the back of the room to really celebrate this book. Derek?
It is really a delight to see, again, Regina Pisa, because I think we'll probably date both of us, because I think I was practicing with you, Barry, at Foley Hoag and Elliott many, many years ago, where Regina was about to take on the leadership at Goodwin Procter. And she has been an inspiration to a lot of young lawyers around the city of Boston and around the country for a good number of years. And we had the good sense to honor Regina in the spring as one of the leading women legal practitioners in the country because of her leadership and because of being the first woman managing partner of an AM 100 law firm. So we are very grateful to you, and thank you on behalf of CLP for hosting us this evening. So I am the executive director of the Center on the Legal Profession at Harvard Law School. It's a lot of words, but it's a fun job, and it's a delight to be here, and I can't thank Goodwin Procter enough. And on behalf of David Wilkins, our faculty director, who could not be here tonight, we thank you. I'd also like to, on some corporate housekeeping notes, to thank Hakeem Lakhdar and Nathan Cleveland, two of our other staff members who are here this evening, who we couldn't do anything without. So I just follow their lead and show up, and they point me in the right direction, although I had a little withdrawal getting back into the car coming downtown after 24 years of practice. But let me say this before we get to the main event. The Center on the Legal Profession is a mission of three legs, as our faculty director would say: research, teaching, and bridging. And tonight is sort of a wonderful culmination and also combination of what we try to do. So the research that Heidi does and many of the senior fellows and scholars who are affiliated with us do enables us to provide lesson plans and case studies and academic programs that actually help with our education, executive education program and other legal education programs throughout Harvard Law School. And so the research that we do leads to our teaching tools, which also leads us to the opportunity to come downtown to places like this, to bridge the legal practitioners with the academy, which, as I'm sure many of you know, is something that is badly needed and we try to do a lot of, and we hope to do more of in the future. And we do that through having people like Heidi Gardner, who came to us from the Harvard Business School. And Heidi is a senior distinguished fellow in our program, in our center now. We're a center. We've been a center for a little more than a year. And Heidi has distinguished herself not only on the issue of collaboration, but on legal professionalism. And we are delighted to have people like Heidi because it enables us to do the world-class research that we like to do every day. So without further ado, I'd like to give you our leading program manager here, Heidi Gardner.
Welcome, everyone. Let me just start with a few words of thanks. And really, the first words of thanks go to all of you for braving the elements, braving the traffic, braving the hordes of Christmas shoppers out there, for all of that, and you still managed to get here. So thank you very much. It's a delight to have you here. We are hoping for a lively and interactive session. I have to warn you, are a little bit glued to the podium. This is being recorded tonight, and so unlike our typical style, which is to wander around and stir up trouble as we go, we're back here. So that's going to be something for all of us to get used to. But a couple of words of thanks. I mean, first to the fantastic reception we've gotten here at Goodwin Proctor. I have to tell you a little story. We were debating, Derek and I were debating whether we should hold this on campus, because if you haven't seen it, we have this gorgeous new executive ed space, and we've got this brand new classroom, and we have these visions of, and then we realized that it's hard enough to get people to cross the road at this time of year, let alone come out to Cambridge. So when we suggested having it downtown, Derek said, well, but it's got to be somewhere worthy of the occasion. I said, I can kind of think of a place. And he said, well, do you think they do? I said, okay, I'll email Regina first thing tomorrow morning. So I went and I checked my email today, because of course I knew I had to get the facts right, being in a law firm. 6:25 a.m., I drop a note and ask Regina, would you consider hosting this event? And so 14 minutes later, I get a response from Regina that says, we'd love to host your event. So thank you for that. I think, not just a model of hospitality, but for, any of my students in the room, this is the model of responsiveness and professionalism. So I thought I would call that out. And thank you very much. And I don't see Claire in the room, but Claire Schott here from, is Claire here? Oh, there you are. There you are, Claire, all the way in the back. Thank you so much for all of your assistance in pulling this together. We've already thanked Nathan and Hakeem from the CLP, but it was really Claire on this end who helped us pull it all together. One quick word of regret. My co-editor on this book, Rebecca Normand-Hochmann, she had bought her tickets. We had everything worked out. She was flying in from Paris and was supposed to arrive yesterday. She ended up hospitalized with asthma. So she is here very much in spirit and is disappointed and sends her regrets. But she'll be, one of the beneficiaries of this video. So Rebecca, I'm sorry you couldn't make it, but we are appreciative of the efforts in everything that Rebecca did to help pull this book together. As Derek mentioned, I'm a scholar of collaboration, and I think I would be a complete hypocrite if I didn't start by acknowledging that this was not at all a solo effort. This book is the result of many minds coming together, not just recognizing the need for a book focusing on leadership for lawyers, but in developing the content for it and pulling it together, I have to say, under fairly tight deadlines as well. So I will introduce our fellow guests in just a moment, but I want to call out a couple more housekeeping things. If by the end of today's session you're intrigued enough that you actually want to read the whole book, we've got a couple of display copies in the back. This is what it looks like, and our publisher has been quite trusting. I vouched for each and every one of you in terms of your ability to come through. So all she is asking the publisher is that if you're interested in ordering the book, take an order form back there, staple a business card to it, or you can handwrite your information on it, and we will take care of everything from there to make sure that the book you order is sent to you and all the billing gets handled behind the scenes. So we don't have to deal with any of that tonight. Kind of makes it all smooth. So we've got two other authors, contributors to the book here tonight, and we are most grateful. They've both traveled quite a long distance to come here. Laura Empson is a longtime colleague of mine. We first got to know each other when we were doing PhDs at London Business School, and since then she's traveled in her academic career to Oxford, and she's now at Cass Business School in the City of London. And she runs their CLP there, or their Center for the Study of Professional Service Firms. And Laura is somebody whose name might be familiar to you if you stay up on the literature. Laura's book, Managing the Modern Law Firm, was an absolute hit. It was a real breakthrough in this area of thinking about what management looks like in today's law firms, as opposed to the strict model of the partnership, which had been so prevalent and had been facing so many challenges. I'm going to ask Laura to say a few more words of introduction for herself. Tonight she's going to be talking about leadership, power, and politics, which is quite a juicy topic. So Laura will be up in just a moment. Our other special guest tonight is Peter Zeuchhauser. Peter is the founder of the Zeuchhauser Group, which I understand is celebrating 20 years of success at this point. Zeuchhauser Group is one of the premier consulting firms that lends advice to mostly chair and C-suite level executives on how to optimize their law firms. And so he's got a tremendous amount of experience, not just 2 decades of consulting, but was serving as a GC, as a general counsel, for a couple of decades before that. So if you're doing the math, I'd like to point out that he started all of this when he was 11. So that's how he managed to accomplish it all today. We'll take questions after Laura and Peter speak. If you've got questions, please wait for somebody to come with the handheld mic so that we can capture what you're saying. It's not such a big room, but for the sake of the audio on the recording, we'll ask you to wait for the mic. And I will then bring up the last of the author presentations, and I'll tell you about the work that I've been doing in terms of leadership and collaboration inside law firms. And I look forward to taking questions after that as well. So without further, over to Laura. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been conducting research into professional service firms for more than 20 years now, and I still find them absolutely fascinating, phenomenally complex, endlessly challenging, wonderful organizations. But one of the questions, when I speak to lawyers, they often say to me, oh, Laura, but surely lawyers are special, lawyers are different, lawyers are unique. And depending on what effect I want to have on them, I have one or two responses. One is, yes, absolutely, because I feel it's important for them to feel special and different and unique, and there's no reason to hurt their feelings. But the reality is you're not. I've known that from my research for many years, but more recently I've become a board member of KPMG in the UK, and we sit around the board table having all the same kind of conversations that you'll be having in law firms around how on earth can we get our partners to do what they should be doing. And that, in a sense, is the fundamental challenge of law firm leadership, which I find so intriguing. So today what I want to do is I want to take you to the dark side of law firm leadership, and I want to talk about power and politics that underpins the actions and the interactions of law firm leaders. And in a sense, the image that I always have is those group of people sitting around the board table, the executive committee, a group of well-intentioned people doing their best to try and make the firm a success. And that is, in a sense, in very simple terms, what law firm leadership is about. Because conventional models of leadership are predicated on the assumptions that leaders, by definition, must have followers. I mean, that's almost axiomatic. You can't have leadership without followership. But in a law firm, the distinction between leaders and followers is problematic because, by and large, partners don't want to think of themselves as followers. I don't know, Regina, how many people in this room would identify themselves as your follower. They might be a little bit uncomfortable about that. They would respect you, but not necessarily say, we follow Regina. Okay, yeah. But they may be similarly uncomfortable with putting themselves forward as leaders. So how many of you in the room would put your hand up and say, hi, I'm a leader and I'm proud of that. I'm very comfortable with that. So I think about law firms as riddled with reluctant leaders and autonomous followers. And that is ultimately why it's so difficult to get anything done in any kind of coordinated and coherent sort of way. So I want to begin by zeroing in on power. And what I'm going to be doing here is drawing extensively from my research and from my interviews. And if you want much more detail, it's all in the book. I haven't got slides here to take you through the data in any detail. So I'm just going to pick out some key points. So here's an exchange from one of my interviews with a law firm partner. So this was a client relationship manager. So I asked the question, does anyone have power over you? And his response was, well, not as far as I'm concerned, no. So I asked again, does anyone think they have power over you? And he thought for a while and said, I don't think so. Clearly, Regina would probably agree with that. Because power, in general, belongs to people who control access to key resources. If you think about that in world terms, that's why we fight over oil, that's why we fight over shipping rights and boundaries and coastal areas. But in a law firm, the key resources are major client relationships, valuable specialist expertise, and a strong reputation. And if you've got all three of those, you will, by definition, be a very powerful person in a law firm. Now, the individuals who possess this kind of power may delegate formal authority to a managing or a senior partner, but they can withdraw it at any time, either overtly by literally voting them out of office, and I quite often get brought into law firms when there's about to be a kind of leadership coup and the senior management are getting nervous about that. So either formally by deposing them, or more commonly just informally by simply ignoring them, marginalizing them, and just not even opening their emails. What do you do? What other kinds of organizations would the chief executive send out emails to their senior people, and the senior people just not even open them, just press delete, just more junk? Yeah. So at the heart of leadership in law firms is this kind of paradoxical tension between extensive individual autonomy and contingent managerial authority. And that's the essence of what makes it so fascinating to me, this tension, which all of you hold within yourself on a day-to-day basis as you're trying to get anything done. So put simply, being a leader in a law firm is very, very difficult. And over the past 10 years, I've been awarded 2 major grants by the UK government to study governance and leadership dynamics in professional service firms. And through these studies, I've conducted several hundred, I think it's more than 400, it's close to 500 interviews in about 20 countries with leaders and partners from many of the world's leading professional service firms. And typically, I only study the firms that are right at the top of their profession. So we're talking about the global elite in multiple sectors. And through my research and through my consulting practice, I've worked closely with 15 of the world's leading law firms in the UK, continental Europe, and the US. And I want to bring out here today a few of the key themes which I'm presenting in the book. I've left out quite a lot of stuff, so if you're intrigued by what I'm saying, buy the book, dig deeper. But I just want to pick out some key points today. And one of the foundations of my research is the concept of the leadership constellation, which I've developed to help identify the power dynamics within a professional service firm, and in this case, a law firm. Now, it's hard for me to talk to you about this without slides, and I could kind of draw the circles in the air like this, but I'm not sure that will really work. But basically, I'll try and explain it to you in words, because the leadership constellation expresses the informal power structures in a law firm that overlaps with and sits alongside the formal authority structures. And at the center of it is the senior executive dyad. Now, typically that's 2 people, a senior and managing partner, or sometimes they're called a chairman and chief executive. And around them sit a constellation of other actors. So you've got the heads of the major businesses. Now, these might be practices, these might be regions, these might be particular market sectors, and sometimes it's a combination of all 3. But they're basically the people who lead the major fee-earning areas. Not all of them just the key ones. So the first thing to understand in this context is working out which are the key ones, which are the ones that really matter. And it might be one office, one practice, and one client sector, not across the board. The kind of stuff you wouldn't see on an organization chart. And in some firms, there will also be heads of business services, and you're finding this increasingly in the major law firms, that the CFO, the COO, the head of HR, people like that will also be very, very close to the center of the power in these structures. In the UK, you will find CFOs being paid more than the average partner in some of the largest law firms, some millions of pounds. And finally, they're the key influencers. Now, these people may have no formal leadership role. They may not appear on any organization chart, but they have power that derives from their control of key resources. So this leadership constellation, as I said, looks very different from a conventional organizational chart. People may see themselves as leaders because they have important sounding titles, but they may not be part of the leadership constellation at all because they're not accepted as leaders by their colleagues. They may have been given these titles to flatter them, to quiet them down, to win their approval, or to win their support. But actually, they are titles without powers. So this leadership constellation expresses the hidden hierarchy, which is only visible to those who are within it or those who run up against it. And those of you who've had the experience of trying to get something done and not really understanding why your brilliant plans were scuppered, it may be something to do with you misreading and misunderstanding the leadership constellation. You thought you'd influence the right people, and it turned out you should have been influencing someone else. So one of the questions I asked is, how do you get into this leadership constellation if you're on the outside? And when I study firms, I draw these sort of series of concentric circles trying to understand the power dynamics. And if you start out here, how do you get to here? And in my chapter, I identify 3 significant tactics. Firstly, for getting there, and then once you're there, staying there and operating effectively. And the first tactic is gaining and retaining the legitimacy to lead through market success. Now, first and foremost, a lawyer must be successful in the marketplace if their peers are to accept him or her as worthy to lead them. Almost all of the respected law firm leaders I've studied have been successful business generators and not necessarily the best lawyers, and they'll be the first to admit that. But what they have done is been brilliant at winning business. And once they've won that legitimacy to lead, they need to remain close to their clients and not allow their colleagues to take their power away from them. So a classic way to lose out when you move into a leadership position in these firms is moving away from the clients, because remember, your power derives from being able to speak with the voice of the client. And in any discussion, the statement that will trump the debate, the trump card you can always play is, yes, but I've been speaking to XYZ major client. And she thinks that is be a really stupid thing to do. Very hard to come back from that if you're a leader of a law firm and you haven't got a countervailing trump card to play. So knowledge of clients is the only way lawyers can continue to exploit the personal legitimacy that clients gave them in the first place. But a question I ask myself is, why should being one of the best business generators in your firm qualify you to lead it? I mean, this is nothing to do with that. I mean, what's the connection? I identified 3 important reasons. Firstly, it's a way of measuring the ambiguous. The ambiguous nature of professional work means that it can be difficult, even for lawyers themselves, to judge the quality of a colleague's work. But by generating a lot of business, lawyers start to demonstrate to their colleagues that they're more than just highly skilled technicians. So they give the impression they have a broader understanding of clients' needs. They have a better nous for business. They just kind of get it. And lawyers think, oh, they understand. Okay, maybe if they understand their clients, maybe they could understand us. The second reason, I believe it's about feeding and leading. What I mean is that professionals value a colleague's commercial success because it'll ultimately generate income for themselves. So those who prove to their fellow lawyers that they can feed their partners are also deemed to be qualified to lead their partners. And the third element is role modeling. Being successful in the market shows that you've already made the personal sacrifices that you're going to be asking of your colleagues. Proving you can bear the pain is the ultimate evidence of your authenticity as a leader. You know, if you can stand up there and show that you have sweated blood for the firm, people will kind of be grateful to you and think, okay, well, you may not exactly inspire them to do the same, but at least you've won the right to ask it. So the first leadership tactic, as I said, was gaining and retaining the legitimacy to lead through market success. That gets you the power to move into the center. Once you're there, though, how do you exercise that power? The second leadership tactic, enabling autonomy whilst maintaining control, is summed up in the following quote from a senior partner in a law firm that I studied. So partners say you're too tight, and they say get looser. So you get looser, and they say it's chaotic, get tighter. And if the money's going up, you can do whatever you like. But if the money's going down, you can't do anything. But the money going up or down isn't within your control. Okay, no wonder it's challenging. So that might sound a bit extreme. So here's a comment from a chairman in another firm who describes it as like walking a tightrope, of helping my partners feel like owners, not dominating them, not getting out in front, so a leader who can't get out in front, not having a huge ego, which makes them feel like the chairman's kind of off on his own trip, but at the same time being strong and providing them with a sense of confidence that we're going somewhere. So you can't get out in front, but you've got to persuade everybody that you know where everyone should be going, but it's not about you. And one of the themes that comes through very strongly in my research is this importance of playing down this ego element. It's not about you. Whatever you're doing for the sake of the firm. It's important that leaders shouldn't try to work alone in maintaining this balance. I mean, if you're becoming overwhelmed with the difficulty of the job, remember the leadership constellation. Remember the group of people around you. You need to enlist the support of your colleagues within the leadership constellation. So when Heidi talks about collaboration in the context of business, I guess you could reframe it and say the leadership constellation is about collaboration in the context of leadership, providing you are all working together and not working against each other. And I've seen that happen too. The third leadership tactic is interacting politically whilst appearing apolitical. So this is where we start to go to the dark side of leadership more explicitly, because this is covert and this is subtle. Now, it's important to recognize that I never specifically asked any questions about politics in my research. It was just not what I was looking for. It was not even particularly what I was interested in. But I became interested in it because interviewees kept raising the subject of politics for me unprompted. And they would always begin by explaining that they themselves were not political. And then they typically went on to emphasize that most of their colleagues weren't either. And that was the bit that intrigued me. Firstly, why are they introducing a topic that I haven't mentioned? And secondly, why do they believe that everyone in this firm is not political? And then they would go a step further and sometimes give me examples of colleagues who had fallen foul of their fellow partners by being seen to be too political. If you behave like that, you won't get anywhere here. It's not good to be seen to be too ambitious. But what I found so bizarre about all this was because I recognized that ultimately law firms are rife with politics. And that many lawyers, whilst denying any sense of themselves as political animals, are in fact highly politicized. Remember, acting politically whilst appearing apolitical? Behaving in a political way whilst other people think that you're not. That is the essence of what I'm talking about. I think it's important to recognize that in a law firm, political behavior is not inherently bad. It's simply an organizational fact of life. These organizations couldn't function at all if people weren't engaging in political behavior. It's only really the political behavior that enables you to get anything done in the first place. Because if you think about it, professional partnerships to some extent resemble political parties, and their leaders therefore need to develop highly political skills. Now, partly, it's because you create these conditions through your formal governance structures. You hold elections, professionals issue manifestos, give speeches at candidates' debate, talk about your electorate, constituents. People sometimes have talk about campaign managers. That's more unusual. But certainly people will talk about mandates. But even in firms that avoid these formal leadership elections, it's really the pluralistic nature of law firms means that a degree of politics is inevitable. How else are you ever going to be able to build consensus? So the leader of these kinds of firms needs to make trade-offs between competing interest groups, get two practices to agree on something when they both want different things, and to offer incentives to individuals to lend them their support for particular initiatives, particularly around the leadership constellation. So I trying to understand why professionals in general and lawyers in particular have this professed abhorrence of politics. I think it seems to arise from the fact that you have some somewhat naive conceptualizations of political behavior. The people I interviewed seem to understand politics rather simplistically as Machiavellian duplicity and unscrupulousness. Now, actually, Machiavelli is often misquoted, and a lot of things are wrongly attributed to him. Even Machiavelli wasn't himself that much of a Machiavellian, okay? But it's become a kind of verbal shorthand for self-seeking behavior and being out for yourself and not collaborating. I guess Machiavellianism is the opposite of collaboration, if you think of it in those terms. But as I said, it's simply an organizational fact of life that to be successful within these firms, you need to be highly politically skilled. And if you look at the research on political skill in the context of leadership, they consistently identify 4 key qualities of effective political leaders: social astuteness, interpersonal influence, networking ability, and apparent sincerity. Note the word apparent. We're not saying it's faked. What we're saying is we can't crawl inside someone's soul and work out whether they're genuine. All we can say is, to me, Peter, you seem like a genuine person. I haven't known you that long. You may be a complete bastard, but you seem like a genuine person. You are projecting to me apparent sincerity. So if you think about those 4 qualities, we can start to now understand why that first tactic is so significant, gaining and retaining success in the marketplace. Social astuteness, interpersonal influence, networking ability, apparent sincerity. These are all qualities that are going to enable you to win business with your clients. So if you can go out there and win business with your clients, the chances are you've got the political skills you need to win the support of your colleagues within the law firm and to actually make things happen. And as with the best politicians, the skill comes in persuading your colleagues and your electorate that you are not pursuing your own self-interest, but are genuinely motivated by the desire to improve the situation of the people around you. So here's a quote, someone talking about the senior partner of a global law firm that would be very well known to all of you, at least by reputation, if you haven't worked with them directly. Sometimes my sense would be that the senior partner doesn't necessarily always understand how influential he is. He's very modest about it, quite self-effacing, and he himself doesn't attach such great importance to some of those things that might be under the heading of creeping, as in slightly sinister. He is not himself a player in that way at all, and it's simply because his own motivations in this world are so, I think, very genuine and very clean. So here's someone who's risen to the top of one of the most successful global firms in the sectors without being a player. Someone who's remained genuine and clean. I find this intriguing. I think he's done a really great job. Taken together, the 3 tactics I've talked about help to explain the phenomenon of the reluctant leader I highlighted at the start of the study. Because according to the first tactic, to lead one of these firms, you must be, or at least appear to be, reluctant to move away from your first love of day-to-day client work. Why would anyone do that? According to the second tactic, the reluctance may also stem from an understandable unwillingness to take on a very challenging role. Why would anyone do that? And according to the third tactic, the most adroit leaders are actually very good at persuading their peers that they were not necessarily ambitious or pushy, even while they're climbing to the top of their organizations. And we have a tradition in the UK, they also have in the Canadian Parliament, of when the speaker, I don't think you have it here, the speaker is dragged to their chair. Do you have it here as well? No, you don't do it. Okay, no, not at all American, but a little bit Canadian, definitely British. Okay, so the MPs elect the Speaker of the House of Commons, And the ritual is that he is dragged protesting by various MPs, pick him up and drag him. And he says, no, I can't do it. And he is made to sit down on this grand golden chair and become the speaker. But that is how he is sending the message. All right, I guess you've all elected me. Yes, I'll do it for the sake of parliamentary democracy. It's a little bit like that in a law firm. And I think the question to ask is some of this reluctance professed rather than genuine? After all, the most senior leaders need to put themselves forward to be elected in the first place, and in some cases fight a very tough campaign in order to get there. And even when we have unelected leadership positions, individuals are going to be sending subtle signals from a very early stage that they are interested in leadership issues. And this will encourage those colleagues to see them as future leaders. One of the things I've had to discipline myself to very, very formally as an academic throughout my career is to try not to speak in faculty meetings. Because every time I say someone, people think that's a good idea, someone comes up with the idea that I should lead something. So I've had to really learn not to say my good ideas. Because in academia, as Heidi will attest, the last thing you want is to be put into a leadership position. Because if you think it's difficult in a law firm, it's 100 times harder in academia. So, to pull this all together, what kind of person can actually do this? Through my research study, through my consulting work, I've identified 10 key qualities of an effective law firm leader. But I'm not just going to stand there and read them out, and we can't just put them up here on the slide. And I would say, if you want to know more, I would encourage you all to buy the book. Thank you very much. Now, we've got time for 2 or 3 questions. Is that okay? And I know some of you have actually already read the book, which is great. So if you want to ask a question about something that I haven't spoken about today, I can try talking about that. I'll take anything you like. Hi. Oh, okay. Who wants? Oh, you have to wait for a microphone, don't you? Oh, suddenly we have light. Right. Okay. Hi.
Hi. My question goes to, we were actually talking briefly before you began to speak. As you talk about this kind of leadership, one of the things that you didn't address, it doesn't really come within the ambit of what you were talking about, is the issue in law firms of strategic planning, which is so different, at least in my opinion, from my own experience, from a corporate setting, where strategic planning in law firms seems to revolve so much around the next compensation schedule, and where, in fact, the ability to think way down the road is compromised by all of these autonomous, reluctant leaders and followers, and these people who are running their own shops, who are silo practices, and make it so hard to think down the road. And I'm wondering whether this issue has been part of your research and how it fits into these 10 soon to be discovered, key traits. Because what I didn't hear from you was about the whole requirement of being a good business person, one, which so many lawyers are not, whether they're good marketers or not, and two, this whole issue of strategic planning that is so different in a law firm.
Well, I've seen a lot of strategy documents that law firms produce. I've rarely seen anything I would describe as a strategy. Right. I used to be a strategy consultant, and most of them is, frankly, bullshit. I remember one managing partner of a global law firm gave a talk to his partners about strategy, and afterwards he came up to me and said, I've heard people say that isn't strategy. And I was thinking, no, just, you're too darn right, darn straight, that's not a strategy. You managed to speak for 30 minutes about your firm's strategy, and that was not a strategy. So I don't think they even get to the stage of strategic planning. I think they're still stumbling to even understand what strategy is. So there we are. They hire people who've worked at McKinsey and places like that, and they may have good people doing strategy in the firms, but getting that to be turned into anything which the partners are willing to adopt and make meaningful is very few of them are anywhere. And in a sense, I mean, what you have within the legal sector is the most phenomenal example of what we in academia call institutional isomorphism. In a sense, people aren't really comfortable having a strategy. They mostly want to do the same as everybody else. And as long as you're doing that, you're kind of safe. You're never going to excel. You're never going to sort of lead. But then, as I said, reluctant leaders within the firm. There's also a kind of reluctance to lead within the sector as well, because that's going to cause you to stick your neck out and to take a risk. It's easier just to keep it safe.
So what are the leaders doing?
Within the firms, they're paying quite a lot of money to consultants and people to do executive education with them.
I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
I'm just curious that a couple of words you didn't use in terms of what people look for in leadership, and one is judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a sense that what a lot of the lawyers would think, if there's going to be somebody they're going to choose as a lawyer, that they respect the judgment when there are difficult issues to be made. And also sort of the word fairness.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who's perceived as fair. I mean, you sort of outlined some of the characteristics that, self-effacing and some other things, but I think judgment and perceived fairness and treating people somewhat equally as human beings is, and sometimes putting people down in a way that others perceive as fair.
I think I agree that. I mean, that's really tying in more with my research on governance, but that is a very, very important value of partnership within these organizations. And what I found certainly I didn't talk about it here, but in another research study I did as part of all this was studying a particularly traumatic change within within a law firm where they had to let go in the end of 70% of their partnership, and they had no legal ability. Within the partnership constitution, they had no ability to do that without going for a vote of the full partnership, and that was going to be incredibly divisive and dangerous. This was in the height of the banking crisis. And in the end, through a series of processes which I describe elsewhere, they were able to do it without having the authority. And one of the key reasons they could do it and that everyone accepted it was because it was seen to be done in a fair way. And ultimately, when the rest of the partners looked around and said, well, why has he gone and why does she stay? They could understand it and they could see that it had been done fairly. If there had been questions around that, they would never have got agreement to it.
My goal was sort of to treat everybody equally unfair, the way they would look at it.
Another option.
And we will have time afterward, not only for more formal questions, but during the reception for
Thank you.
Laura.
I'll try to keep this short, but first I want to thank you all for coming. No one told me before coming that I should pitch the book, but I will. You should all buy the book. And I'm forever, I am a law firm consultant, and I'm forever grateful to all of the law firm leaders who pay a lot of money to law firm consultants. And I bring thanks from my wife and daughter and our dog to all of you who are here for doing that. I'm going to talk a little bit about my chapter on data analytics. And my background, I'm a 1975 law school graduate. I started as a pro bono environmental litigator. I became a real estate lawyer and then a general counsel of a large real estate company where I sort of practiced corporate law and sort of wasn't a lawyer. And then 20 years ago started consulting to law firms. I don't have a math background. I don't have an engineering background. I never really thought about data analytics and how they might apply to the law. And you might wonder why I am up here talking about this. And indeed, when Heidi called me and asked me to write a chapter in the book about this, I wondered, who am I to be writing this chapter? I had written a column in the American Lawyer magazine where I've been a contributing editor for 20 years about an experience I had consulting. I don't ordinarily work for corporate law departments, but IBM, their general counsel, had been a longtime friend, and he called one day and said, would you help me reorganize the IBM law department? And I talked to him a little bit and it sounded like a very interesting project, so I flew back to Armonk and talked to him about it, and then wound up undertaking the project. While I was sitting in the entryway to IBM's executive suite, they had their annual report out, and I picked it up, and there was a letter from Ginny Romney, the chairman and CEO of IBM, about IBM's new strategy. And of course, you've probably all read in the paper that IBM has struggled for at least 3 or 4 years with their annual earnings and profits because the hardware business is a low margin business, and the world is changing, and IBM decided it needed to reinvent itself. And so I read that annual report, and in it, Ginny Romney set out their new strategy, and their mission was to be essential to their customers, which struck me when I read that as being highly relevant to law firms. And then I read a little further, and she said, well, so what do we need to do to be essential to our customers? And she said, we need to understand how our customers of today do business. What is the business model of today? And she laid out 4 pillars of the new business model. The first one is data analytics, the ability to analyze data. And that's one thing that companies must have to succeed in today's world. The second is the cloud, and there are 2 elements to the cloud. There's the public cloud, and there's the private cloud. To tie this into the law and to foreshadow what I'll say in this brief talk, and you can read more about in the book, in the law we might think of the public cloud, think about it this way. Every time a judge makes a decision, that decision is a matter of public record, and it now goes on the public cloud. When he rules on a motion, or even when the judge simply extends a trial date, all of that data goes on the public cloud. All the testimony is on the public cloud. All of the judge's rulings and opinions are on the public cloud. And then law firms have a private cloud. Usually today, that's still in servers at the law firms. But soon that's going to actually be in the cloud. It's actually moving there as we speak. And that's proprietary information to the law firm. It might be research memos. It might be billing records. Who worked on something? How many hours did it take to produce that piece of work? How many times did it need to be revised? Did it ultimately succeed in the objective? For instance, was a motion won, or was a deal struck? Something like that. That's all proprietary information that the law firm has in its cloud. Some of it may belong to the client, but it resides in the law firm's private cloud. So you have the public cloud and the private cloud. And then the third pillar was what Ginny Romney called systems of engagement. And the easy way to understand a system of engagement is to think of a company like Amazon, where you go on to Amazon and you type a few keystrokes in when you're looking for something, and it knows what you're looking for really after 1 or 2 keystrokes, and it comes up and says all the places you can buy that, and it also will tell you what other people bought who were interested in buying what you bought. It creates new markets, in essence, for the people who sell things on Amazon. So that system of engagement, you provide the data, Amazon engages you, and then Amazon gives you something back that you want. And by having more data, by making that valuable to you, they draw more information about what buyers want and create more new markets. So that's one. Google would be another system of engagement. These are things not that you want to buy necessarily, but what you're interested in. So Google knows what you're interested in, and on the right-hand side of your screen comes up, people who are interested in what you're interested in might want to buy these things. So that's another system of engagement. And then a third one, and this was really a big breakthrough in system of engagement, is Facebook. And Facebook had the innovation of not just finding out what you might want to buy, or not just finding out what you're interested in, but you put your whole life story on the wall. Everything you're doing, they learn about you. And you also tell Facebook whether you like something or not. And that one click, this one byte of data, tells Facebook an enormous amount of information. And these systems of engagement have become some of the biggest companies in the world because of the way they gather data. They mix data from the public cloud. If you want to buy something, you can find out how to get to that place on Google through directions. You can find out the lowest price through proprietary data that they have on their cloud. And they use the public cloud and the private cloud to create new markets. And then the fourth pillar is cognitive learning, that machines actually learn from the data. So they know when you click in that one data point, they know everything about you. They know what you buy, what kind of milk you buy, what kind of eggs you buy. They know all of these things because they can scour enormous amounts of data from everything about you that's either in the public cloud or the private cloud. So those are the 4 initiatives at IBM. That's what they say makes business work. Now, how does that relate to law firms? So I want to tie that in as the second part of what I'm about to deliver. I want you to think about what lawyers do. When I ask that question in law firms, lawyers often think of themselves as problem solvers. That's the common wisdom. We solve problems. But what lawyers actually do, first of all, they are taught, it is well known in law school, to think like lawyers. And what does thinking like a lawyer mean? It means that you become familiar with a set of facts or data, and you apply a set of rules to them to predict an outcome. That's what you do. You apply, what we do as lawyers is apply rules to facts to predict an outcome. And in predicting an outcome for a client, if you're good at that, if you're successful at that, clients will pay you money. You look at a client's case and you say, if this case goes to trial, I can win it. Or I can get this case settled for you because of X, Y, Z. And you've applied facts to rules. Or you write an agreement. And in writing an agreement, you're saying, if you get the other parties to sign this agreement, then you'll have the right to conduct yourself in this way, to use these assets, whatever they may be, intellectual property or real estate or some financial asset, according to the way we've written up this agreement. And if the other side tries to stop you from using it, you'll be able to enforce this in court. I'm predicting that outcome. So when you think about the IBM, the 4 initiatives, and you think about all of the public and private data that you have, you're now moving up against the IBM business model and their cognitive learning machines that can read something like 800 million pages in 2 minutes. I think it is. It might be 2 seconds. In healthcare, these diagnostic computers diagnosing cancer, one of them read in a matter of an instant 28 million articles published on cancer to come up with a diagnosis and prescriptive treatment for a client. And because they have access to so much more data, they're able to predict the outcome with much greater accuracy than a person can. And so we are moving into an era in which machines will likely be able to better predict outcomes than human beings or lawyers. And that means that lawyers are going to have to become very adept, first of all, in using these machines. And what I would say is we're at the beginning of an arc of change in the profession that will be very vast. I have always thought that the legal profession, practicing law, has changed a lot over my career. You're looking at someone, and I can see there's probably some other people in this room who had similar experiences. My first motion, I actually reproduced it on a mimeograph machine. How many people remember what a mimeograph machine was? But we cranked out the pages, and then we had a collating rack, and we put the pages, we collated the brief. And I remember shortly after I started practicing law, when our law firm got its first collating copy machine, how amazing it was that you could put a typed document, typed by the way, into the machine, and it would copy and collate it very quickly. I've kind of forgotten about that experience because the advent of the personal computer was still, a still greater change, and then the advent of the cell phone and everything being in your hand, access to so much information. So over the arc of my career, there's been what I perceive as a lot of change. But what I would posit is for the people sitting in the room here and the people joining firms like Goodwin Procter today as first-year associates and young lawyers, by the time they get to be in their mid-50s, the profession will be quite different. It will be a profession that will be driven by data analytics and cognitive learning machines. And much like the financial services industry, and you take Goldman Sachs as an example, where 25 or 30 years ago they had a tech department, that was very similar to any law firms today. And in today's world, Goldman Sachs has 32,000 employees, and 8,000 of them are data engineers, and they write algorithms. So I think when Heidi writes about collaboration and diverse collaborative teams, and I think of people of diverse cultures and ethnicity and background and gender and collaboration among them and among partners, I think there's a whole other element that's coming to us, and that is collaborating with people from other disciplines to produce better results in the law. There's one more piece I'll leave you with, because it's not just about predicting outcomes that's what's important here. That's how the law is practiced, I think, is going to change vastly through data analytics. But it's also how firms build client relationships and actually develop strategy. And when you think about what I said a moment ago, that in the firm, so let me first say, you're looking at someone who in 1986 gave a talk to the LA County Corporate Law Department section about the rapid demise. I predicted the rapid demise of the billable hour. That didn't happen. And so you might take everything I say here today with a grain of salt in that regard. But what I heard for many years from law firms and clients alike, the reason alternative fee arrangements were so hard to structure was because law firms didn't know how much things cost. They didn't know how much it cost to win a case or write a motion. They didn't have all that information, so they could never come up with fixed fees or contingent fees, big firms, because they just didn't know how much it cost to do the work. But where we are now is in an era where all of that data, the law firms actually do have all that data. It's just not organized the way they need it to be. It's not organized in a useful way. And we now have machines that can scour that data, scrape it, and organize it in a way that would be useful. So where it used to be, when you would have a summary judgment motion, that you are going to argue in court and you're going to appear before a particular judge who you've never appeared before in the past. And you might send an email around to some of your colleagues and say, has anybody ever appeared before this judge on a summary judgment motion? Do they ever grant summary judgment? What are they like? What's this judge like? Now your firm will be able to access on the public cloud every ruling on a summary judgment motion that that judge has ever made instantaneously. That will be at your fingertips. And also at your fingertips will be exactly which ones your firm was involved in, who worked on it, how much time they spent on it, how much it cost, and what the outcome was in front of that judge, and even what arguments in all of the arguments that were ever made in front of that judge on that subject succeeded best. What's the highest likelihood of winning the summary judgment for that specific judge? So you'll know exactly how much it costs to produce that, and you'll know exactly what ingredients you need to get there. And that will all be done without ever sending a single person into the library or to the computer to look on Lexis. That will all be right at your partner's fingertips. And that day is probably coming sooner than we all think it is. And indeed, when you think about that, it's going to have drastic implications for the way law firms are organized. Because all of the work that is done now by so many people will actually be, all the data that is gathered and the rules that are relevant to that data will all be gathered together by a machine that can learn from each experience and predict the outcomes better than anyone else. Someone raised the question about judgment. And when you think about judgment, it's about your ability to predict an outcome based on what factors come into it. What's fair may go into that. I think actually it does go into it. But judgment will become a coin of the realm, really, for lawyers. And experience judgment will be extremely important. The ability to work with data engineers to write algorithms to produce correct predictions, what facts should be considered and what rules should be considered. These will be very highly valued skills. And the challenge will be, how do you hire people? How do you get people the training to acquire that kind of judgment? So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, but I think when you think about the fact that just 40 years ago or so, we were producing briefs on mimeograph machines, I think you can think about the fact that some of the younger people who are sitting here in the audience, by the time they get to be in their 40s and 50s, the practice is going to be quite different and law firms will look quite different. With that, any questions?
Do you mind if we hold questions?
Not at all.
If we do that rapidly on. Thank you. So hello once again. The chapter that I wrote, focusing on collaboration, looks at leading the campaign for greater collaboration within law firms. And by campaign, I wasn't talking in the sense that Laura was talking about in terms of political campaign. I was talking about a military campaign, which might strike you as a little bit strange in the context of collaboration. But here's why I was talking about a campaign for collaboration. And that's because we see that law firms are really fighting a war on two fronts, if you will. On the one hand, law firms today are fighting a war for clients, and on the other hand, they're fighting a war for talent. Now, my proposal for you today is, if you think about collaboration, and I'll define what I mean by that in just a moment, but we're talking about collaboration in some ways as a solution or a remedy or an approach to help leaders tackle both of those issues that they're facing, client and talent. So when we talk about collaboration, I want to be careful because collaboration as a term has become such a buzzword these days. It's used all over the place. And part of the problem, I think, is that people are talking about collaboration as if it's an end in itself. We should collaborate more all the time. It's a good thing. Sort of a big group hug and kumbaya. It's not where I'm going with this. The way we are looking at collaboration is a means to an end. And the end that we're trying to achieve is better client service and retention, attraction, retention, promotion of the right kind of talent inside the law firm. The reason we think, and our analysis has helped us to uncover the reason why collaboration has become such a buzzword these days, we think it stems from the collision of two competing trends. On the one hand, we see specialization. You know it very well. Every lawyer in this room, every business person in this room has claimed expertise over a narrower and narrower domain. You're becoming more and more of an expert, right? That's what has to happen. The pace of knowledge change is so rapid right now that in order for you to stay on top of your domain of expertise, you have to narrow that domain. So expertise specialization is one trend. The other one we see, however, is the exact opposite. Clients' problems are becoming increasingly broad, more and more complex, necessarily multidiscipline. So when I ask clients about the complexity of their problems, there are two areas. Quick quiz. Anyone shout it out. What do you think are the two areas that clients see as more complex today than they were, say, even 3 or 4 years ago? What do you think those are? Regulatory and compliance and cyber. Right? So those two areas are ones that are increasingly broad and complex and sophisticated at the client level, but here we are trying to tackle them as smaller and smaller experts. That, I think, is our argument for collaboration. What we mean by collaboration, it might involve big group hugs, but most importantly, it's the integration of specialized expertise in order to solve these complex problems that no individual could solve on their own. So how does that help solve the war for clients and the war for talent? Let's focus on clients first. If what we're saying is that clients' problems are increasingly sophisticated and they need experts to work collaboratively in an integrated way to combine their expertise in order to solve these problems, that is where much of the value comes for the clients. What we can see through our analysis, and I have to say, Peter, the law firm data doesn't just live in their own servers, it lives on mine too, because I have managed to collect millions of data records, decades worth of timesheet and personnel and financial records from a variety of law firms and other kinds of professional service firms. And in crunching those numbers, what our team has uncovered is that there are real financial benefits associated with that. We can show you evidence that cross-practice collaboration or cross-jurisdiction collaboration leads to much greater revenue, much greater profitability, and greater stickiness or longevity of client relationships. We have that data. We're happy to share it with you. And the other reason that collaboration can help in the war for clients is that right now, not that many law firms are good at it. Right? And so when we talk about client stickiness or client loyalty and the link to collaboration, what we mean is this. One of the general counsel I was talking to, he said, the lawyers aren't going to like this, but in reality, I can probably find any given lawyer a substitute in the firm next door. Right? So you might consider yourself the guru on topic X. Your competitor has somebody who may not be quite as good as you, but your client might see you as fungible. If, however, say you're a tax lawyer and you team up with somebody in IP, finding the IP tax duo in the next firm is a lot harder. Finding IP tax and real estate who work well together and collaborate and integrate their knowledge is even harder, and so on and so forth. So the ability to collaborate right now gives law firms a competitive advantage because it's an unusual capability. How about the war for talent? There are a number of ways. First of all, if the data is right, and we think it is now, we've replicated it across so many firms, we think we're pretty confident in being able to say that cross-practice and cross-geographic collaboration leads to higher profits. If that's true, that alone can help with the retention of some of the stars, right? So that's one of the ways. But in a slightly more ephemeral or less tangible way, collaboration can help attract and retain some of the best legal minds. If people go to law school in order to tackle tough legal problems, and those tough legal problems, the toughest ones today, require collaboration, that alone is an argument for how collaboration is going to help engage and retain some of the best minds. People who are increasingly looking for a challenge have got to be able to find that challenge in a more collaborative kind of environment. Even more than that, though, I said I wasn't going to talk about big group hugs, but there is something to the science behind collaboration. Not my research, but what we know for sure from neuroscience is that collaboration, people who are part of a community, have not only the support in terms of a moral sense and an emotional sense, but people who have the ability to rely on others for professional advice, for guidance, for mentoring, people who have that kind of collaborative experience, which often grows from direct work on a client engagement, it actually creates changes within the structure of their brain. The structure of the brain leads to different kinds of behaviors, and it becomes to a self-reinforcing mechanism, such that there is actually strong science now to help us understand why it is that collaboration increases people's ability to withstand significant stress and emotional drain. In other words, people who collaborate are more likely to be resilient in the face of difficulty. There are a lot of other aspects to the link between collaboration and client retention. The last one I'll mention today is millennials. Okay, we've got a number of millennials in the room. There are a lot of stereotypes about what millennials want. One of the things I think it's fair to say is that people who are sitting in my classes at Harvard Law School today are probably not sitting there chasing the dangling carrot, right? The dangling carrot of partnership. Many of the students I talk to, and it happened in the class we're engaging in right now, people are talking about how they're going to build skills that are transferable so that they can have a rich and rewarding career regardless of where that happens. And so if you want to be able to retain some of the best and brightest talent within your firm and attract them there in the first place, offering an environment where you can truly give examples of substantive collaboration is more likely to attract the kinds of individuals who are going to be doing that sophisticated work and more likely to, as we'd say, play well in the sandbox. So I'm not going to take much more time. I realize you've been incredibly patient at this point. Well, I'd love to be able to continue the conversation with any of you, over a drink, over a snack. We've got refreshments in the back. Let's take one or two questions. If anyone has burning questions right now, let's take them in the plenary, and then let's carry on the conversation informally as we go. Questions for me, questions for Peter, any remaining questions for Laura at this stage? Or if you'd prefer to grab that drink and have the informal conversation, I'm right there with you. So thank you again, Regina. Thank you so much. And I've got that signed copy of your book for you. Thank you. Everyone help yourself, and we look forward to carrying on the conversation.
You had a chat with him about this?
Oh, yes, I have. Good.